Well, I think I take this opportunity to thank all the participants to have joined in for this webinar. So it's a great pleasure for all of us to be having Jeanne here at the webinar, the first of its kind for all the senior management and the CxO's. We've been thoroughly enjoying the methodology that Jeanne is professing on using in the design thinking. So I think by then Lokesh should join in. I think Jeanne, I think it's you. The stage is open for you. You could start the session.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I'm looking forward to talking to you about this this new set of tools and methods called design thinking, and talking about, in our experience now, having worked with thousands of managers and really 100,000 or more if we look in the online space, how we're finding it is helping them to innovate and to grow their businesses. So I'll just jump in. Now, I'd like to begin before we talk about the details of design thinking and what it looks like by talking a bit about why we need design thinking and what it brings to the party. One of my favorite ways of thinking about innovation comes to us, compliments of Apple, of course. When someone at Apple was asked to describe their creative process, this is what he drew. Now, that's the kind of drawing that those of us in business don't find comfortable. It implies that innovation is some kind of uncontrollable, unsystematic process. In fact, it leads to what I call the Moses myth. This idea of Steve Jobs and Jack Ma and Elon Musk, that there is a category of person who is just naturally able to see new futures, and that the rest of our job is mostly to sit around and wait for that person to show up so that we can follow their instructions. Well, that's not an approach to innovation and growth that I find powerful. And our research tells us that this is not true. Everyone has the ability to innovate. Some of us just need more help and guidance than others. Let me talk about why that is in a little bit more detail. I'd like to tell you the story of two managers and the way in which the mindset they choose and the behaviors that they engage in leads one to succeed at innovation and growth and the other to fail. Let's first talk about George. George, I would say, is a high-achieving manager. Let's say George went through school, got a degree from a top school in engineering, very smart, dedicated, hard worker. For George, life is a test, and he wants to get the answer right, which seems like a very positive thing until we bump into the reality of the uncertainty of the innovation environment. Let's contrast George with Jeff. Jeff may have gone to the same school, gotten a similar degree, but he has made a different set of choices in his career, and he looks at life differently. Jeff considers life a journey of learning. So he's not troubled by occasionally making mistakes. He understands that when we step into an environment of uncertainty, it's only through experimentation and trying things that we're able to learn. So as a result of these basic differences in mindset, we see that George learns to fear uncertainty. Again, there's nothing irrational about this. If we want to get the answer right, we need to stay in an environment where we already know what the answer looks like. But there are serious problems with that when we move into the innovation space. Jeff, on the other hand, accepts uncertainty as part of life. Right? Now, we know that to accept uncertainty and risk is not necessarily to seek it. We've done a lot of research on entrepreneurs here at the Darden School. And one of the interesting findings is that entrepreneurs are generally no more risk-seeking than you or I. What is different is that rather than avoiding risk, as George has been taught to do, entrepreneurs like Jeff accept the necessary risk and manage it. So one way to think of design thinking and why we're interested in it and why it's so valuable in this day-to-day environment we live in today is because uncertainty in our environment is unavoidable. If we try and avoid it, we'll never get to growth. What we have to learn to do instead is to actively manage that uncertainty. And design thinking gives us one set of tools to do that. Well, let's look a little bit more. Because George is fearful of uncertainty, he's generally avoided new experiences. So George may have left engineering school, joined in manufacturing, and gone up through the ranks in manufacturing until when we meet him in our research, he's a very senior manufacturing professional who is in many ways the expert on a variety of topics. Jeff, on the other hand, has been continually seeking new experiences. Jeff may have started in manufacturing, but when he was offered the chance to go to marketing or to sales or to research and development, he said yes. Why? Because it was an opportunity to learn something he didn't know. The consequence of that is that we find George and Jeff have very different repertoires when we meet them as senior managers. Now, repertoire we use here in the same way that we would use a musical repertoire. It really is about how many pieces of music can we play effortlessly without difficulty. Because George has limited his career experiences, and because it's been important for him to be right, George believes that being smart is the same thing as being right. He has what we would call a narrow repertoire. One of the myths about innovation is that these new ideas suddenly come to people in the shower or out of nowhere, when in fact, research tells us that innovation is usually a recombination of things that are already existing, or it's an idea we snatch from another industry and bring into our own. So George's narrow repertoire, which in stable times we'd call an expert repertoire, and it would be a good thing, faced with innovation is now a bad thing because George just literally doesn't have many experiences to put together and knowledge to steal from other places. So it goes further, however. It isn't just that their repertoires are different. We find in our research that these two managers understand their customers different. George is a quantitatively oriented person who's been taught to know his customers as data. So he's a believer in market research. He has lots of demographic information on his customers. He knows in theory what they look like. Jeff, on the other hand, is drawn to knowing his customers as people. In today's language, we often hear that referred to as empathy. We empathize with our customers and understand not just how we sell them more of our products, but how we can use our capabilities to meet the needs they have to get their own jobs done. For example, in our research, one of the managers we talked to was the head of the custom M&Ms business. And I'm sure you're all familiar with M&Ms, those delicious little candies from the Mars company. They now have the technology in certain places to actually put personal messages on your M&Ms. And of course, these are very expensive M&Ms. But a young mother decided, even though she lived on very limited income, to order custom M&Ms with happy birthday and her son's name on them as a special birthday treat. Well, unfortunately, due to a mistake, the order got delivered after the party. We can look at the difference between understanding that customer, who let's call her Cynthia, understanding Cynthia as data. You know, Cynthia is a young wife, aged 19 to 25, with a certain level of income, who lives in a certain place, versus developing empathy for Cynthia as a young mother with very little money, but trying to give her son something special for his birthday. One of the things that design will pay close attention to is what is the job to be done of our customers. The job Cynthia was trying to do with that candy was not just to bring more sugary treats. to her son's birthday party. She could have done that cheaply by going to her local grocery store. Instead, the real job was to send a message to him that he was special and deserved nice things. And maybe the other job was a message to herself that she was a good mother. So when that shipment failed to be delivered, it wasn't just a missed shipment to a customer. It was the loss of an opportunity for Cynthia to send a special message. Now, when we know customers at that level of depth and we understand their needs and their job to be done, it allows us to detect many more hidden opportunities. Right? With the superficial data he's got and a limited repertoire, George can only see a small number of opportunities. Jeff, on the other hand, with his broad repertoire and this deep knowledge of customers, can see all kinds of opportunities that are simply invisible to George. And again, as we think about this, one of the other findings that has always surprised me in our research is as we study managers who are good at growing their businesses organically, if we look at their external environment, nothing changed. Customers didn't develop new needs all of a sudden. Competitors didn't behave differently. The government didn't intervene. The opportunities these managers found were always there. It was just that others couldn't see them. So one of the challenges in this world is how do we help managers to understand customers deeply enough that they see opportunities that are otherwise hidden to them. I'll talk a little bit later about how design thinking helps us do that. There's one more piece of the puzzle though, and it's how we manage risk. George has been taught to manage risk through analysis, right? Excel spreadsheets. Let's take data, all the data we've got, and try and answer this question about the future. But Jeff knows that data from the past is never a very good way to predict a new future. So instead of relying on flawed data from the past, Jeff goes out and seeks new data through experimentation. This idea of experimentation is one of the trends sweeping business today, whether it's in the form of agile software, whether it's in the form of lean startup, whether it's in the form of design thinking. Equipping managers with a set of skills to design cheap, fast experiments is really critical. It turns out that the old Silicon Valley mantra to fail fast and cheap in order to succeed sooner really has a lot of validity behind it. So what we find then is because George tends to act slowly, he's always looking for more data and trying to be sure he's right before he acts. Paradoxically, George tends to place bigger bets slowly. He actually believes there's one right answer, right? And in a world of uncertainty, that's rarely true. Think about the experience of a venture capitalist. In many ways, as we step from running our traditional businesses into this world of innovation and growth, we're stepping into the world of venture capitalists. And again, we know a venture capitalist, even a very good one, who invests in 10 new business ideas, will only ever see 1 to 2 of them succeed. And that's not because the venture capitalist isn't doing the right kind of analysis, isn't smart enough or dedicated enough. It's because the basic principle is uncertainty. I have to invest in those 10 businesses and experiment so that I can figure out which 1 or 2 are worth investing in, which means if we're placing one big bet, the odds of success are very small. Jeff, on the other hand, understands that having a portfolio of ideas and placing a lot of bets, small, cheap, and quick, is the way to quickly weed out and figure which 8 of those 10 projects to stop investing in. Because in the world of innovation and growth, knowing when to shut down an investment in a new idea is just as important as knowing when to increase your investment. When we take all of those together, we find that George is much more likely to fail in these new situations of high uncertainty. What's hard here is that the reason George is failing is because of all of the things that he learned that helped him succeed in a stable environment and led him to his career success are now getting in his way and almost dooming him to failure at growth. Whereas Jeff will succeed more often, and when he fails, he'll fail below the radar in much less visible, less expensive ways. Now, the problem with this is it becomes a self-fulfilling cycle. George's problems reinforce for him how hard it is to be right in an environment of uncertainty, whereas Jeff's success reinforces for him how powerful it is to know and develop empathy for your customers and to place small bets. The challenge we have in most organizations that I work with is that most of the people we are leading look like George, not like Jeff. They come from backgrounds where they are trained analytically, where they believe in rigorous methodologies, where they are uncomfortable with the idea of uncertainty and particularly uncomfortable with the idea of being wrong. It's impossible to staff a business completely with Jeffs. And if you could, I would worry about your ability to get your product or service delivered on time, at the right cost, at the right price, at the right quality. We need the Georges of the world to help us keep the trains running on time. But we also need some Jeffs to show us a different set of behaviors when the issue is innovation and growth. And we need a toolkit to help George not change who he is, but to learn some new tools that will allow him to copy some of Jeff's most successful behaviors. And for me, that is the role of design thinking. Design thinking is just another problem-solving approach. We have a lot of problem-solving approaches in business, and design thinking is no better or worse than any of them. What's different about it is that it is a particular set of qualities that optimize it for highly uncertain environments. The first of those qualities we talked a lot about. It's empathy. Design thinking isn't about technology-driven change. It is about human-centered change. Right? So I begin a design thinking process with a deep understanding of the job to be done of the human beings whose needs I'm trying to meet. Then I step back and I ask the possibility question. What we find is too often in business organizations, we start conversations about innovation and growth with the constraints that we're dealing with today. If we limit our discussions to what is possible today, we'll never create a different kind of tomorrow. So what design thinking asks us to do is put aside our constraints temporarily. We'll bring them back into the process later on. Put them aside temporarily and ask the question, if anything were possible, how would I help this customer accomplish the job they are hiring a product or service to do? Now, once we've done that, we move into an iterative process, and we're going to be testing. And as we move into testing, we're going to bring those constraints back in and see which ones we can be creative enough to work around. Because again, our research suggests that we have this myth that the most important aspect of creativity is the ability to come up with an idea in the first place. But in many mature established organizations, ideas are easy to come up with. What's hard is to overcome the constraints and move an idea through the organization and out into the marketplace. And the combination of possibility thinking and iteration is what gives us the power to think creatively about how to end run those constraints. So the way that we conceptualize design thinking, as Innomantra is working with us, is to say design thinking is about 4 very simple questions. We first ask, what is? If we want to be data-driven when we invent new ideas, the only data we've got is about the present and the past. So let's start by holding ourselves in the problem space, making sure we have a deep understanding of today's pain points, because we'll use that. as the trigger to develop a set of design criteria that will tell us what a better solution has to look like. Once we've distilled our research down into a set of design criteria, we can then move into brainstorming. Now, you'll notice that in many instances in business, our idea of innovation is that we go into a room and start brainstorming to start. But when we start brainstorming without having gathered that kind of deep data on customers' jobs to be done, all we're doing is imposing our views on our customers. Right? This time, brainstorming will be different. We'll be brainstorming using the data we've gathered and using the design criteria. Now, out of that brainstorming comes a whole portfolio of ideas, not one. Because of the uncertainty in the environment, like the venture capitalists, we can't know which one is correct. Right? And we move it into testing. An important aspect of testing and design thinking is rapid prototyping. Right? One of the ways to improve the accuracy of the feedback is to create very simple, low-fidelity prototypes that may just be in the form of storyboards, right? That will allow a potential customer to immerse themselves in that new experience and give us better feedback. Finally, after we've done some of this co-creation with our customers, gotten some feedbacks, iterated our ideas, we're ready to actually experiment in the marketplace. That's the what works phase. And then we'll take what we've learned there, and if we've been successful, we're ready to move into scaling. If we find that some of our assumptions weren't correct, we have to move back either to refine our ideas or think about our target market or whatever aspect. So very simple 4 questions that will help us to move through the design thinking process. Well, let me give you an example. Our example that I'd like to share with you comes from Denmark, a country where the government has been very involved in design thinking and using it to solve social problems. One of the problems that is of interest to them is that many 125,000 or so at the time this case was written, senior citizens rely on government-sponsored meals to help them. Now, unfortunately, 60% of these people are actually still having poor nutrition. Right? Now, that seems a bit of a mystery, doesn't it? If we're providing meals, why are people still having poor nutrition? And poor nutrition, of course, is an expensive problem for the government because the more people suffer from nutrition, the more likely they are to become ill and to have higher healthcare costs. In fact, they find that 20% of seniors are actually malnourished. So in the municipality of Hostelbrouw, they are given government support to hire a design consulting firm called Hatch & Bloom, and they hire them with the definition of the problem, which is fix the menu. Right? Now, this is a good example of one of the ways in which design thinking adds value. Often, our very definition of the problem is so narrow and so conventional that we drive out all the interesting solutions because of our definition of the problem. Right? Now here, fix the menu is the obvious definition of the problem. Well, if people aren't eating, it must be because the menu has problems. Right? Well, fortunately, designers don't accept that. And the folks at Hatch & Bloom went through this 4-question design process we've talked about. So in this first question, what is, they used a variety of ethnographic tools. One of them is journey mapping. Journey mapping is one of the most powerful tools in the design toolkit. I always joke that if I only have 2 hours of a manager's time and can only teach them one tool, it would be journey mapping. One, because journey mapping looks pretty familiar. We're used to value chains, we're used to flow charts. What journey mapping does is basically create a flow chart of the customer's experience from the very beginning to the very end, right? From the origination of the job to be done to its accomplishment or lack of accomplishment. And then it maps the highs and lows of that journey at each step of the process. Right? So in this case, they start in the kitchen, even though as part of Fix the Menu, they've been told that the kitchen workers aren't really part of their study. But still, they start in the kitchen, they watch the kitchen workers prepare the food. They ride with the people who deliver the food. Right? They watch the elderly unwrap the food, prepare it, eat it, clean up. The entire journey is chronicled as we look for what's happening in order to understand as we look for what's happening in order to understand this question of why are people malnourished? Why aren't they eating? Well, it turns out that they learned some very interesting things in this process. One of the things they discover is that the seniors are embarrassed to accept government assistance. In the Danish culture, when you need help, you should get it from your family. If your family can't help you, you should hire someone to do it. But to have to accept help from the government is painful and embarrassing. So even having the cars pull up in front of their house to deliver the food is a problem for people. The other thing that they learn is that losing control over what we eat is very painful. The only thing more painful is to physically lose control over our bodies. So these meals are being delivered, there's no choice involved. And as a result of that lack of choice, people aren't as hungry as they would be otherwise. Third, they've discovered that people are lonely eating alone. These meals are delivered in single packages, right? And so people are eating alone, and they're lonely and not interested in eating. More than that, they miss the seasonal food of their youth. And this to me is a very interesting and important insight. For most of us, being able to eat strawberries 12 months a year is a good thing. But for this group of elderly people in Denmark, they associate strawberries with their summers. They associate apples with their falls. They associate pumpkins with their winters. And so making everything available all of the time is not meeting the need they have to have fond associations with their food. And then finally, one other thing they find as they do this research is that the workers in the kitchen are just as bored and unmotivated creating the same meals day after day, disconnected from the people they're serving, as the elderly are. So now, instead of fix the menu, we've developed a very deep understanding of what's actually going on here and what the design criteria are that need to be met in order to produce a solution that actually gets people to eat more. We take that and we move into our second stage, the ideation stage of what if. In what if, a popular design tool is co-creation, which means inviting others into the design process with us. In this case, we have a workshop. We invite some employees of the care centers. We invite municipal officials, some experts in elderly issues. We invite some of the kitchen workers and some of the volunteers. That diversity of perspectives is what is going to allow us to find higher order solutions. I'll talk more about this in a minute, but I think, again, we know from lots of research that if we really want new ideas, the best way to get them is to assemble a group of people who think differently from different backgrounds. In a business sense, it means having someone from manufacturing and marketing and sales and research development working cross-functionally. Right? But the promise of that diversity is often not met because we can't talk to each other across our differences. One of the most interesting projects we're working right now is with NASA and the Mars mission team. As we've talked about how design thinking can help them, design thinking can't solve the technical issues of getting to Mars, but it can help scientists in their different narrow disciplines talk to each other. And because the breakthrough technological solutions require working in the white space between different expertise, creating that conversation is critical. So design thinking helps us by giving a set of ground rules to create a conversation across this diverse participants, and in this case, by posing what designers would call a trigger question to help people think creatively. What if instead of a public delivery kitchen, this organization was a restaurant? Well, in that case, the cooks would be chefs. How would we treat them differently if they were chefs? The vehicles would be waiters. How would we think differently about the delivery process to fulfill the role of waiter? And then finally, instead of just a description of what was being served today, we would have a menu, which would give people options. Well, we put that together now, our portfolio of solutions, and we move into testing in the what wow stage. One of the important things we're looking for here in What Wows is a solution that stakeholders want, we can deliver on, and it has a sustainable economic model underneath it. That is the wow zone. So in the first part of the design thinking process, we've thought only about the needs of our customers. Now we're beginning to factor in our capabilities as an organization and the economic model underneath it. As we move into what works, a very important tool is going to be visualization, trying to take this idea that we have in our head and make it real to people. Here's an example. One of the ideas they came up with and moved into testing was this idea of a note card, very simple note card that goes along with the food. The idea was perhaps if there was communication between people in the kitchen and people, the elderly in their homes, it would create an environment where both parties were more satisfied. Well, simple card, small, cheap experiment, a tremendous success. The elderly started writing back and including snapshots of their family. The people in the kitchen got to know the people they were serving. In the end, at the conclusion of the process, we began with how do we fix the menu? We broadened and reframed that problem during what is to develop a deeper understanding. We came up with ideas, we co-created, we tested them in the marketplace, and in the end, we were able to accomplish happier seniors who are more interested in eating with better nutrition and motivated employees. One of my favorite parts of this story comes from a quote from the supervisor of the kitchen. Now, keep in mind, this is the same supervisor that suggested that the workers didn't really have anything to do with the project, where she said, if you have professional pride, you'll also cook good food. Good food has to come from the heart. This shift in mindset, this empathy she's developed, both for her workers and for the elderly they serve, has come through the design thinking process. Well, let's talk a little bit about briefly some other examples. We see this being used by organizations around the world, both large and small, entrepreneurially and established. We've worked on a case around IBM's use of design thinking to reimagine the trade show. We've looked at redesigning the patient experience at Monash University Medical Center in Melbourne, Australia. We've looked at 3M and the way in which they're working with their sales force to try and transform the B2B experience in which salespeople interact with customers. SAP, of course, has been a big proponent of design thinking for a long time. One of the things we've studied is the way they've used it to rethink their strategic planning process. Suncorp is a major Australian financial services firm using design thinking for post-merger integration to align two very different organizations with different cultures and strategies so that they could work together. We've seen in the US government, at the US Food and Drug Administration, where we have medical device manufacturers, regulators, patient advocacy groups, caregivers, coming together for different kinds of conversations to work across their differences to bring the very best medical devices to market. At the US Health and Human Services Department, we've seen an involvement of frontline workers in the design thinking process, a program called Ignite, which reaches out to all 80,000 workers anywhere in the United States and invites those with an idea to come forward into an idea competition where the best ideas are selected, and then those who have them are taught design thinking principles and are asked to go back and re-examine their assumptions, reframe their problems, and work through. And then finally, a particularly interesting one has been used at Toyota at the Customer Contact Center. And I might talk a little bit about that because it's a great example for me of the way in which we can use design thinking to bring not just the software engineers to write new software, to expand our definitions of the problem. So if we look at the Toyota story, what we see first of all is that design thinking is useful for many kinds of projects. It's not just about organic growth and customer-facing issues. It's also extremely useful for internal process redesign. And here at Toyota, they're using it to redesign the call center experience. so that their call center reps are able to deliver much higher quality service to the car owners who are calling in. What we're doing is we're trying to understand in the what is stage, not just the what's happening, but why it's happening. What's preventing the reps from doing what they need to do? Involving the tools that allow collaboration across the software engineers, the call center reps, their leaders, the Toyota change management consultants, cross-functionally allows people to really develop a broad perspective on what is the customer, in this case, the call center rep, and what is their job to be done? How do we help them do it better? In this case, once they have a portfolio of solutions, they run a series of low-cost experiments that help them pinpoint the needs and continue to refine and test the ideas. And I think it brings home this notion that when we talk about innovation, when we talk about growth, we're still talking about change management. How do we get people to change? How do we help them to develop a passion for delivering better products and services to their customer? How do we help build change readiness? The conversations of design thinking, in our experience, really do that. Now, as we've looked then, stepping back, again, some significant research we've been doing over about the past 8 years to understand what is the way in which design thinking delivers value. Well, first and most obvious, it helps us come up with better ideas, right? That's really why we use it in the first place. But it has a set of benefits that are deeper than that. Design thinking is, in my belief, a social technology that helps us structure conversations across different perspectives, whether those are functional differences in our organizations between marketing and manufacturing, whether there are differences with our customers, whether there are differences with our supply chain. But it helps us talk together in a more effective, efficient way. It also gives us a risk management strategy. It teaches us how to manage risk cheaply and efficiently. And finally, it helps us facilitate behavioral change. It does all of these things. Now, what we've discovered, back to George and helping teach George these new tools, is that structure and detail of process is extremely important. 10 years ago, when we first began to teach the 4 questions, what is, what if, what wows, and what works, we thought that would be enough. But experience working with managers, particularly managers who come from a more linear quantitative background, like engineering, like finance, and areas like that, need a lot of structure to feel comfortable with the process. So as a result of that, we've developed a 15-step process, which again, sounds kind of silly, 15 steps to innovate, right? But turns out to be extremely important to helping managers go through an entire end-to-end experience using the design thinking tools. Because in my view, it is only by using the tools that people actually learn the methods, right? We can't just talk about it in the abstract. I can't lecture my way into teaching you design thinking. I can lecture about the tools, I can give you examples, I can give you tips about how to do them better, but you have to apply it and learn within a project that matters to you. So one of the things that we've had great success with working with the folks at Innomantra is this idea of online learning. Because online learning is so perfect for project-based, that is, someone can begin a project, we can work them through the 14 steps and 15 steps, we can deliver the learning they need for that step when they need it. Online learning has proven, in our experience, to be extremely successful and efficient as a way of scaling this competency. We have a specialization in design thinking and innovation that we offer at Darden, which consists of 4 classes. And we'll be starting up soon another class in January. Those classes can be customized to particular organizations so that we can focus on particular needs. Right now, for instance, we are working with NASA on a specialized online program. We are working with Anheuser-Busch InBev, for instance, on a specialized online program. So it's proven to be a very effective tool. And again, each of the classes delves into a different part of design thinking that we need to know. Insights to inspiration, moving ideas into action, managing the teams that are so critical for innovation in the workplace, and then finally layering in an advanced set of discovery tools. So with that, I've given you a lot of information in the 45 minutes that we've been talking together. I'll look forward to your questions and to understand how we at Darden, in partnership with Innomantra, can help you solve your innovation and growth problems using design thinking. So
Thank you, Jeanne. Thank you, Jeanne. This is Muthu. So to the participants, if you have any queries, please do post now. I would request you to raise your hands so that we don't have a flood of questions coming in.
And I can see the Zoom group chat, so I will be able to see the questions as soon as they show up. Perhaps you have a question you'd like to start us off with on the Innomantra side.
Thank you, Jeanne, for making the job much more simpler for us to set the context. Most of the times, people have an opinion that the design thinking is more of a human-centric. Yes, it is human-centric. And how does it help solve the technological challenges, and how does it connect to the bigger organizational goals? And this is what we in particular at Innomantra are trying to address, that it can solve and take the organization to the next level.
Yes, I think that bringing together the technical and the human is so critical. One of the projects that we've studied a great deal is with the Transportation Safety Administration in the United States, where, of course, they're struggling with technical challenges about how to make air travel safe, but any technical challenge, in order to be implemented in reality, has to deal with the reality of the human being. Right? I thought it was interesting when the Nobel Prize in Economics went to Richard Thaler with behavioral economics. We know that human beings are not machines, right? They are not always rational in the sense that we would like them to be. Understanding how they see the world, understanding their job to be done, and factoring that data into our technology implementation, I think, is absolutely critical to success. We all know as engineers we can go and create technology, but until that technology is accepted and used by the people we're working with, all of that investment counts for nothing. So I think this idea of blending technological and human-centered innovation is very important. I also think blending quantitative big data approaches and the more human-centered data of design thinking is important. Oftentimes, big data will tell us where to look, but design thinking is capable of going deep and telling us what's actually going on below the surface. So I think together, these seemingly different and inconsistent things can be very powerful. Some folks are interested in the course details, and certainly we'll be sharing the slides with you. And I think all of the details of that are up on the slide. So thank you for that question, Mercedes. Any other questions?
I think even Mr. Vaibhav has got a similar question. How could design thinking be applied for technology innovation?
You know, I think when we really look at the interface of human-centered and technology-driven innovation, the question is, where are we beginning? Right? In technology innovation, we tend to begin with the technology, right? We invent a new technology that makes new things possible, and then we go out and we look for someone who needs that technology, right? Design thinking has an important component of technology innovation, but it tends to start with the people and their needs, and that allows them to specify what technology is needed. So for instance, we find with companies like Anheuser-Busch InBev, we are putting a front end to their stage gate product development process using the design thinking method. So we all understand stage gate product development and the development of products and services and technologies. The concern is if we aren't doing any rapid thinking and testing and data gathering, we end up putting stuff into our stage gate process that doesn't, in the end, have a need associated with it. I mean, we know that the most significant reason that new products and services fail is not because we can't make them, but because no one wants them when we've made them. So design thinking reduces risk by, first of all, saying, let's really go deep to understand what that technology must help customers do. And with that understanding, we can then develop that technology. So as I think about it, they are not incompatible, but they tend to start in two different places. And of course, at Success in Business, we're looking for that intersection where we have a new technology and where it meets a real need in the marketplace. Here's a question. Is there a way to calm the world misunderstanding of machine learning and AI using design thinking as an interface, for example, for mass education? Certainly, I think, as I've talked about, this combination of the big data that artificial intelligence provides with the small data, or actually thick data, what designers would always call it, can be powerful together. In the same way that the whole human interface design has been so critical. I think one of the advantages of design thinking as we start to talk about mass education is that it is extremely scalable. We've had great success teaching it cheaply and quickly online. People can apply it to problems they're already trying to solve, either within their workplace or even at home. And so I do think that this intersection of big data and artificial intelligence and small, thick data coming out of design thinking, there's very important work to be done at that intersection, and that we can scale the introduction to design thinking to help build out competency in that field.
Thank you, Jeanne. There was, another point that we would like to add from Innomantra, that we are trying to deploy the design thinking for digital transformation, of which the machine learning and artificial intelligence is a component. So to identify the human interventions, because all that has been devised so far, and the technology that we're looking at has a human touch point. And interestingly, I also see a couple of questions which are asking as to what sort of challenges could be applied, design thinking could be applied. And I think you should probably mention them about the wicked and tamed challenges. Yes. And how wicked and tamed could turn into wicked when looked at a different perspective.
Yes. So for instance, this question of assessment before we get into design thinking, I think is a very important one. Design thinking is optimized for solving certain kinds of problems. And like any other problem-solving methodology, if you use it on the wrong kinds of problems that it is not suited for, then it won't be very effective, right? So for instance, one of the characteristics obviously is human-centered. If we're optimizing supply chain logistics, chances are actual human beings are not a huge part of that, right? We have numbers, we have delivery dates, we have a series of data-driven items that are very important. So question number one for me is always, is it human-centered? Are the behavior of human beings central to what we're trying to accomplish here? The second question I usually ask is about the quality of the data we've already got and whether or not it is predictable. So if we have lots of good data already, and we believe that that data can accurately predict the outcome, then you probably don't need to use design thinking. I mean, to this notion, there is this notion of tame versus wicked problems. With tame problems, data from the past predicts and allows us to assess cause and effect. With wicked problems, the level of uncertainty and often the level of complexity in a problem, where we have a lot of different things happening at once, makes it almost impossible, one, to even agree on the definition of the problem, much less on the solution, right? And two, to actually, in advance, using a priori data, figure out cause and effect. In those instances, an experimental methodology is critical, and the tools of design thinking, not only at the back end for how to design and conduct an experiment, but at the front end for how to develop a reasonable hypothesis tested in the experiment, are very powerful. Now, as we say that, I'd also say that in our experience, design thinking is very good for solving tame problems as well that are human-centered. But again, the important part, I think, in the decision to use design thinking or not does relate to how important are human beings in the process, and in particular, changing the behavior of human beings. That's why we see so much design thinking in fields like healthcare right now, because we all know we should stop smoking, but we don't, right? So how do we change those kind of hard to change behaviors? Those are some of the challenges, I think, in assessing which particular problems are best suited for design thinking. I see a question also about, are there tools or models in psychology that we can use for design thinking? In fact, the reason why design thinking works, often the psychological tools tell us. Right? So for instance, in cognitive psychology, people like Kahneman and Tversky have studied categories of cognitive bias. That is, we are terribly flawed decision makers for a variety of reasons. One is we have a hypothesis confirmation bias, which is we look for data that supports the hypothesis that we want, right? We have what other cognitive psychologists call an ego empathy bias, which is we project our own needs onto other people when we look for that, right? We have biases. We like solutions that are easy to understand, right? And so solutions that are further into the future or more complex, we tend to discount heavily. And so one of the things that the design thinking toolkit does is it just works against these cognitive biases, right? It forces us to surface assumptions, for instance, which teach us to be better hypothesis testers. Right? A lot of information we're learning now with neuroscience is pointing out reasons why things like prototyping work so well. So we know that it is very difficult to elicit accurate feedback from prospective customers about a new idea. Right? The more we can help them to pre-experience that idea, the more likely it is that they can give us accurate feedback. So now neuroscience tells us that when we're actually doing things like pretending to practice the piano or pretending to swing a golf club, we're actually activating the same circuits as when we actually do it. So the focus of prototyping then is not to kind of be a dress rehearsal for a product. It's to give people a deeper experience of what that new concept will feel like so that we can get better feedback from them. So behind the success of design thinking, it's kind of all psychology because we know that's why it works. Do the design tools vary with industry? What are the foremost tools for ideation in software? In our experience, the design tools don't vary much with industry. The process does not vary much with industry. Essentially, we're trying to take a group of people and understand their needs, right? And whether the needs we're trying to understand are in a healthcare environment or in a financial services environment or in a software environment, the fundamental tools that we use tend to be the same. Many of the ideation tools in particular in design thinking are not all that different. I mean, we still use brainstorming. Now, the critical difference, though, is we're brainstorming using design criteria that we've derived from our data gathering during the what is stage. So brainstorming may not look a whole lot different, but what's driving the ideas is very different. It's not us imposing our ideas. It's us taking research and using those. Concept development tools can be very important. Again, we know that recombinations of existing things can be very powerful, and so we see a lot of that. A lot of the power in ideation is in things like metaphor and analogous situations. It's trying to pull people out of the prison of our mental models and our ways of seeing and doing things that we've done in our industry forever. And so a lot of these tools would be familiar, but when we put them together with the data gathering tools at the front end and the testing tools at the back end, that's where the power is, the combined process. Well, I see that our time is just about up.
Hey, this is Gopan Nair from Virginia. Jeanne, one thing I want to emphasize what you said is the change in behavior. I personally have applied Jeanne's methodology in my work, and I've seen it's very successful. Even the contact center folks on the floor, and if I equate that to manufacturing, the shop floor people, this tool has the power to change their behavior. And when we involve them as in co-creation and collaboration, I can guarantee miracles happen. I think that is the beauty of this methodology which Jeanne has put together. And this does not apply just at the top level, but it applies to all levels in the organization. And I'm talking this from experience. Yeah. And senior people who are here in this webinar today, it'll be very important for you to see that this can spread across the organization, and the benefits can be reaped for the organization to innovate and growth. And also, I think right now we are partnering. I think Innomantra is very much interested in this methodology, and they are the kind of forerunners in adopting this and implementing this. So they are on the ground in India. So it is very, very good for if you need support, if you need help, then you can reach out to them, and that way this methodologies can be scaled across India. And I personally have a passion for that, and I've been talking to Jeanne occasionally very many times that India, based on the diversity, the population, and the opportunity and the different industries we have, this methodology has great scope in turning India to the next innovation engine. And that is why this will be very interesting to be adopted. Yes. Thank you again, Jeanne and Innomantra, for this opportunity.
Thank you, Gopan. I think you raise an excellent point. People ask me, well, is design thinking just the latest trend? It will come and go. I believe not, because it reaches out and engages us as human beings, and people want to do more of it because it feels good and produces business results at the same time to serve people and to understand their needs. So I think we are going to continue to see more and more use of design thinking. Certainly in the US, we're seeing a dramatic increase in corporations interested in scaling the design thinking competence, not just to their senior executives, as you mentioned, Gopa, but to the entire organization. Because if we unleash an entire organization, and if every individual has the opportunity to identify ways to create value and take advantage of them at their level, it may be small individually, but when we add it together, it's a very big number. Well, thank you for joining me. I hope it's been helpful. I hope we'll have the opportunity to work with many of you with Innomantra and in the future and at Darden, and we stand ready to support you in any way that we can. So, best of luck.